Hello, everyone, and welcome to this very special Meet the Real Leaders event with the amazing Dr. Jane Goodall. I am Julie Van Ness, President of Real Leaders, and I'm so delighted that you're joining us today. I think all of us feel honored to be in the same Zoom room with such a legendary leader. As some of you all may know, we host these events on a regular monthly basis. So you can find information on upcoming leaders that will be joining us on our website and also posted during today's conference. We have three simple housekeeping rules for today. One is please mute your microphones on your mobile devices as well as your Zoom microphones. Also, please keep your video on during the duration of the event, especially during the breakthrough rooms so we can see your faces. It's so much more engaging. And please note that Zoom now asks that it prompts you to accept and tap on the accept button for recording. So when you go into your groups. And lastly, please type in the chat box where you're coming from, since we love to see the global audience participation. And now I'd like to introduce you to our founding editor, Grant Schreiber, who will be asking all of the compelling questions for Jane today. Grant?
Thank you, Julie. And I'd like to welcome Dr. Jane Goodall to Meet the Real Leaders today. Dr. Goodall went into the forest to study the remarkable lives of chimpanzees. And when she came out, she wanted to save them. When she discovered that the survival of their species was threatened by habitat destruction and illegal trafficking, she developed a breakthrough approach to species conservation that improves the lives of people, animals, and the environment by honoring their connectedness to each other. In 1977, she founded the Jane Goodall Institute to ensure that her vision and life's work continue to mobilize the collective power of individual action to save the natural world that we all share. She joins us today to discuss why good for the environment is also good for business. If you put a financial figure to the 100 most serious environmental impacts that industry doesn't currently pay for, everything from greenhouse gases to land pollution, the number is huge. $4.7 trillion a year. In some industries, the damage actually outstrips the value of products created. This is obviously not a sustainable solution, and we look forward to hearing from Jane today how we as business leaders can start to change this. Dr. Goodall, welcome.
Well, thank you very much. And here we are with Mr. H, who you just met in those little slides. And he says hello, but after this, he'll be quite quiet.
Thank you for bringing him on the show today, Jane. He's accompanied you around the world, I believe, to lots of notable conferences.
Yeah, he's been to 68 countries with me.
Wow.
So he's very traveled, he's very famous. And once I forgot him at a lecture, and a little boy of 9 years old came up afterwards to get his book signed. And he said, "Where's Mr. H?" And I said, "Oh, he was tired today because I'd forgotten him." And he burst into tears. It was terrible.
Well, I'm glad he's with us today.
He's here.
I wanted to start off, we have a lot of business leaders and CEOs here today. And I would love you to explain how you've managed to bridge the gap between sustainable environmental issues and business. It's obviously an increasingly growing issue in the world, increasingly important one as our natural resources dwindle. And I wanted to ask you why you think good for the environment is also good for business.
Oh, well, I think for one thing, it's becoming increasingly clear that, you know, this current economic model, that there can be unlimited economic development on a planet with finite natural resources, you know, that the GDP growth is more important than protecting the environment for the future, is something that isn't going to continue to work. And, you know, already in some places, thanks to the demand, the unsustainable lifestyle of many of us, these natural resources are being used up faster than nature can replenish them. So I think that the reason that businesses, well, they're needed, because unless business changes its rapacious demand on the environment, then the future is pretty grim. And so I think that businesses, in some cases, have seen the writing on the wall that unless the natural resources are protected, their business cannot continue because there will be nothing to continue it with. And in other cases, you know, a lot of business leaders I know have become very concerned about the future. And they are gradually changing the way that their business operates, thinking about the supply chain, thinking about the unequal wages that are often paid so that people in other countries are, you know, that they're captured by sweatshops. They can't actually rise out of it because all they do is make just enough money to live for a day and feed their family. So they can't save up. And so I think more and more businesses are understanding things can't go on this way. We'll come to the end.
So how do you actually turn what's happening in the world right now into something, because business by nature is about taking advantage, looking at resources and exploiting it. And that's not a mindset that's going to go away very easily. So how do you turn people's mindset into seeing it as something to build on, something positive, rather than being told, don't do this and stop using this and use less of? How do you switch that around to make people see it as something they can build on to create a much more robust, healthier world?
Well, actually, you know, I never tell people don't do something. I never tell people that they're bad people. So how do you change minds? You just say it's very difficult. It is difficult. But you don't change minds by pointing at people and telling them they're bad. You have to try and reach the heart, because I think true change only comes when people change from within. They're not going to be told what to do. So how do you reach the heart? Well, I found the only way I can reach people's hearts is through stories. And since I left Gombe National Park in 1986, first of all, to find out what problems the chimps were facing, why were they decreasing in numbers? And while I was on that trip in different parts of Africa, realizing the problems faced by so many of the African people, you know, the crippling poverty, the lack of health and education, and realizing the problems, but at the same time, traveling further and further to raise awareness about these problems, meeting so many people who'd lost hope, but and trying to give them hope. How do we give people hope when they've lost it, when they look around at what we're doing to the planet? And again, it's stories, and we can come back to that later. But during these travels, you know, I've met so many amazing people doing incredible things, but I've also come face to face with the results of what we're doing to harm the planet. And so I tell people, I've stood in Greenland and watched the ice melting and the icebergs carving. And the Inuit elders have told me that when they were young, even in the height of summer, the ice never melted there. And this was the end of winter. I've met people who've had to leave their island homes because of sea level rise. I've met environmental refugees who've been driven from their homes to try and seek a way of making a living elsewhere, to send money back to their families because, for example, extended droughts caused by climate change have made it impossible for them to make a living where their ancestors used to for hundreds of years. And, you know, so actually having experienced these things and telling people about them, and then talking about the things that we can and should do to make things better, they've got to decide themselves.
Right. And talking about matters of the heart, you met David Greybeard when you were in your 20s. And that was one of your big moments that shifted your consciousness towards knowing what you needed to do. Is that him?
That's him. Beautiful,
Oh.
handsome guy.
Okay.
Very handsome. Chimps are different. Some of them are quite ugly and some of them are very handsome.
Right.
But the point about David Greybeard, you know, for the first 4 months of my time in the field, and we only had money for 6 months. You know, I hadn't been to college. It was a crazy idea. Most people thought that I'd never survive more than 2 weeks and then I'd give up. For the first 4 months, the chimps took one look at this weird white ape and ran away. And it was getting very, very depressing. But one of the chimps, and that was David Greybeard, began to lose his fear of me. And on this never to be forgotten day, I saw him sitting on a termite mound, breaking off grass stems, using them to push down into holes that he opened up with his finger in the termite nest and pick off the termites with his lips and crunch them up. I saw him pick a leafy twig to use that as a tool he had to strip the leaves. So back then, it was thought that humans and only humans used and made tools. Well, Western science believed that. If people had bothered to talk to the pygmies or other people living in the rainforest, they could have told them that chimpanzees use tools. But anyway, back then, this was a breakthrough, and it was the turning point in my whole study. Leakey could go to National Geographic. They said they'd fund the study when the 6 months was up. They sent a photographer, a filmmaker, who took the films that people have now seen all around the world. So David Greybeard was the one who then helped the other chimps lose their fear, because if I approached a group that was ready to run and David was there and just sitting calmly, well, I think the others must have thought, well, she's not so frightening after all. So gradually I got to know them, all their different personalities, and good mothers and bad mothers, and males competing in the dominance hierarchy, swaggering, trying to look as intimidating as they possibly can, shaking their fists, swaggering upright, just like some human male politicians. And so, you know, everything I was learning, kissing, embracing, holding hands, so like us. And shocking to find that, like us, they're capable of violence and brutality, and even a kind of primitive war based on territorial, based on the fact that males are very territorial. And just like us, there's good mothers and bad mothers, and that makes a huge difference.
Could you share that moment with everyone here today of when you held David Greybeard's hand and there was something that moved inside you in that moment?
Yep. It was after David had begun to allow me to follow him, because at first I just let him go, you know, thinking that's the way to get his trust. But on this occasion, he went through a tangle of vegetation and I lost him. And I thought, well, never mind, I can find him another day. But when I got through that tangle, he was sitting and he was actually looking back. I mean, it really looked as though he was waiting for me. Maybe he was. So I sat down near him, and lying on the ground was a ripe red palm nut, which chimps love, oil palm. So I held it out to him on my hand, and he turned his face away. So I put my hand closer. He turned, he looked directly into my eyes. He reached out, he took the nut, and with one movement, he dropped it. But then he very gently squeezed my fingers, which is how chimpanzees reassure each other. So in that moment, we communicated in a gestural, symbolic language, really, that surely predates human spoken language. And it made a very deep impression on me because he understood my motive was good. I understood that he knew that, but he didn't want the nut. So it was a very, very key moment in my understanding of chimpanzees. And I just felt, you know, I have to dedicate my life to these amazing beings.
It's an amazing story. And Jane, if you had to give advice to people on how they can seek out their own David Greybeard moments, because those are the moments where people are moved to action and to do something notable with their lives. I mean, not everyone can travel to Africa and meet chimpanzees and bears. So
to Africa.
Right.
I mean, the thing is, we have dissociated ourselves from nature. We are spending more and more time with social media, with cell phones, with emails, with, you know, all the paraphernalia of the materialistic life that so many are involved with. And what we have to realize is we are part of the natural world. We're not separate from it. And we depend on it for food, for water, for air, for everything. And so we really need to look around us. And if you open your eyes, I mean, even in an airport, I was walking through an airport one day and there were two sparrows and they were courting. And the male had seen a crumb on the ground and he kept flying down to try and pick it up. And every time he was halfway down, a person walked by and he flew up again. And the female was doing this begging, you know, flapping her wings and fluttering her wings. And everybody walked by. Nobody noticed this beautiful little piece of nature going on. And I stayed until he finally got his crumb and was able to appease his lover.
That's a great story. And so how would you suggest business leaders look at their current business? And not everyone's involved in environmental issues, but I think it touches everyone in some way, even if they're not conscious of it. What kind of consciousness is needed today for business leaders, and what role should business leaders take in making other people aware of what's needed in the world right now?
Well, I think business leaders, you know, have a very major role to play because governments in many cases, you know, they're tied up with corruption and, you know, their next election campaign and so on. And so it's businesses and philanthropy that are moving into the gap that's left of healing the harm that we've inflicted on nature. So depending on the business, you know, just think about it. Am I harming the environment with this? The product I produce, how was it made? What about my supply chain? Is there anything I can do better? Can I put more money into paying wages, fair, equitable wages? And the good thing is that shareholders are beginning to demand that the business becomes more ethical. And the other thing is the consumer pressure. So those of us who are lucky enough to live in society, you know, where we're not struggling with poverty, we can make ethical choices in what we buy. Did it harm the environment? Was it cruel to animals? Is it cheap because of child slave labor or sweatshops? And if we don't buy the products made unethically, then business will change. So it's from both ends. It's the shareholders on the one hand and the consumers on the other. And then the CEO and the staff. I know businesses where it's the staff who are pressuring the CEO and the top people to make change because they don't want to work in an organization that's destroying the planet because they've got children and they're getting more educated, they're getting more aware of what we're doing to the planet, which is grim.
Exactly. And have you seen any successful examples of companies that are doing well in this way of producing and looking at their supply chains and you know, just more conscious about what they're doing?
Yes, I won't even give you an example because there are many of them. There are many who've seen the writing on the wall or had their hearts touched. And they truly are trying to do things in a more ethical way. And this spans people working with IT, the fashion industry, food. You know, there's an awful lot to change, but it's beginning to happen. And you get, for example, there's a big push now to go back to small-scale family farming, permaculture, regenerative agriculture, organic food and move away from this horribly destructive commercial agriculture that, what am I trying to say, industrial agriculture with its monocultures, with its heavy use of pesticides and herbicides, which is destroying the soil. I mean, why should we grow our food with poison? It doesn't make sense. And it's destroying biodiversity. And as I've said, we rely on ecosystems for everything. But what we're relying on is healthy ecosystems. And this massive loss of biodiversity, sixth great extinction, if we're not careful and all these ecosystems collapse because of overuse, think about our grandchildren and theirs. What's the future for them?
Right. And how do we get that connection with nature back again? We've got urbanization growing on a massive scale, people moving to cities, natural resources being destroyed on an epic scale. And so people have got less opportunity to connect with nature and with the animal kingdom. How do you get that connection back again? And how do you get people excited about that way of thinking? And more importantly, how to act?
Well, we're starting, with young people, because after all, it's their future that we've been stealing. And so we began the Jane Goodall Institute, we began this Roots and Shoots program, began with 12 high school students in Tanzania. It's now in more than 60 countries, members in kindergarten, university, everything in between. And the main message, which is everybody really, that every single day we live, we make some impact on the planet. And some of us can choose what sort of impact we make. And because everything in the rainforest, I learned, is interconnected, that applies to all life. Everything's interconnected on this planet, this one tiny little blue and slightly green globe floating in the darkness of space. And so we decided, me and the 12, that Roots and Shoots would form groups in schools mostly and universities. And each group would choose for themselves 3 projects at least, one to help people, one to help animals, one to help the environment. And so that program is very much concentrating on introducing young children, as young as possible, into the natural world and pushing for more outdoor learning for young children in the schools, pushing for all schools to have environmental education. And the children are changing their parents. I mean, this is happening all over the place. And I've met so many parents who say, well, I buy organic food because my child refuses to eat anything else. I've become vegetarian or vegan because my children are telling me how industrial animal farming is destroying the planet to grow the grain for these billions of tortured animals in their tiny cooped up pens, and how masses of fossil fuel is used to make this whole agricultural business work. And they're producing methane gas, which along with CO2 is one of the worst greenhouse gases, these gases that trap the heat of the sun and cause climate change, which is leading to these changed weather patterns around the world. More of the really bad hurricanes and typhoons, the more terrible flooding, the longer droughts, the terrible wildfires. And
up until last year, I think you were traveling around 300 days of the year, if I'm correct.
Yep.
That's an incredible amount of traveling and an incredible dedication to a cause. I know that some business leaders here today probably struggle to get out of bed some mornings because the challenges are too daunting, or there's things you don't want to face. As a leader, how do you motivate yourself to do something like that? That's an incredible amount of travel and commitment to a cause. How do you keep yourself going?
Yeah, well, on the one hand, I could be blamed for, you flying on planes all the time, but at least I don't have private jets. And because my visits to these countries clearly pay off. I mean, I get so many letters saying, I had lost hope, but you give me hope. I promise you I'll do my bit. Roots and Shoots group starting all over the world. So I don't feel too bad about that. But what keeps me going? Well, I'm passionate. I mean, I care deeply. I really, from my bottom of my heart, I care about what we're doing to Mother Earth. I care about the animals. I care about the forests and the wetlands. And it's my spiritual connection to the natural world. And I can derive strength from that connection. And so I'm also obstinate. I'm not going to be knocked down by all these nasty things happening. It just makes you think, I've got to fight harder. And if we lose hope, I mean, my main job now is to give people hope, because once you lose hope, that's the end. Because if you don't hope that what you do is going to make a difference, why bother? Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. And if when people say, well, I've looked around and the problems facing us are so terrible, there's nothing I can do as an individual. As one individual, the only one on the planet who cared, no, you couldn't do a thing, wouldn't make any difference. But there's more and more and more people who care. More and more people recycling, reusing, picking up litter, helping to raise money for charities of their choice, doing all these different things. And the cumulative effect is moving us in the right direction. So when people say, well, I feel helpless, I say, okay, stop following this. We're always told, think globally, act locally. No, don't think globally until you act locally. What is it I can do here in my community? And start to do it and try and build up a group that will help. And maybe it's lobbying to stop yet another shopping mall. Or maybe it's lobbying to save a wetland from being built over or something like that. Or maybe it's just a simple thing like gathering people up to clean the beaches or get garbage out of the river. And then you find you can be successful. And then you realize that around the world, there are other people who care just like you, doing the same sort of thing. And then you're motivated to do even more. And that inspires other people to join you. And so that hopefully, well, it is spreading a ripple effect around the world. We just need more people, and businesses are in a great position to help in these ways. In fact, there are some of the really large corporations like Salesforce, DocuSign, Apple, who are going to involve their staff in our Roots and Shoots program, because adults can be part of it. So our staff and their children. So, I mean, this is huge. These are companies that have staff all around the world. So it's just a question of plugging on and not giving up and, realizing that nature is resilient. And if we give her a chance, can reclaim an area that we absolutely destroyed. And we've got this extraordinary intellect that makes us more different from chimpanzees and other animals than anything else. And science is coming up with a lot of really innovative solutions, whether it's, clean green energy or whatever it happens to be. And animals on the brink of extinction are being given another chance so that we can move into biodiversity and try and at least slow it down and slow down climate change.
Right. Jane, I'm aware of your time constraints today, so I'm just going to close with one last question for you. If you had to give everyone listening today their next step that they need to do straight after this call, a lot of the things you've spoken about are big concepts, and people are going to sit back and think, how can I make change on a big scale? I know things start with small steps. If they had to do one thing today, straight after this call, a small action or something that just guided them in a different direction as to what they need to do, what would that be?
Well, you know, don't you think it depends a little bit on the person and what their interests are and everything? One is what I've said is the main message to Roots and Shoots. Just remember that every day you live, you do make an impact on the world of some sort. And so think about your impact and see if you can do something about your own environmental footprint. But what's the main message? The main message is we do all make a difference every day. And then if you push me and say, well, what's one thing that would really make a difference? Moving towards a plant-based diet is something now that's really very important. And also we must think and talk about human population growth. We can't just hide it because it's politically sensitive. It's a fact. There's over 7 billion of us on the planet now, already running out of some natural resources. And it's estimated to be closer to 10 billion by 2050. So if we carry on with business as usual, then I don't know what will happen. And so it's going to take every single one of us to think about our own environmental footprint, to think about the impact we can make. Some people can make a huge impact. Some heads of CEOs can make a huge change by signing a check, or some people in politics can sign a bill that will change things for people living in poverty or animals and the environment. So it depends on who you are, but everybody can do something. So go to bed thinking back over your day and think, well, I did that, and that is making a good impact. That's important.
Thank you.
And by the way, don't you think that I should tell people about why do I carry a monkey?
Yes, sure. Please share with us.
Mr. H was given to me 28 years ago by a man called Gary Horn, which is why he's Mr. H. And Gary Horn was in the US Marines. He went blind when he was 21 in a helicopter accident. For some odd reason in this new dark world, he decided to become a magician. So everybody said, but Gary, you can't be a magician if you're blind. Well, he did become a magician. The children don't know he's blind. He arranges his props ahead of time. And at the end, he'll say to them, you know, things may go wrong in your life, but if they do, don't give up. There's always a way forward. And he does he does skydiving and cross-country skiing. He taught himself to paint. Amazing, he never painted before. Anyway, he gave me Mr. H thinking he was giving me a stuffed chimpanzee, and I made him hold the tail. I said, Gary, I know you can't see him, but you know, chimps don't have tails. And he said, never mind, take him where you go, and you know my spirit's with you. So Mr. H is my symbol for that indomitable human spirit that overcomes adversity and won't give up.
Fantastic. I think most of us will be out to buy a stuffed toy today to remind us of the same thing.
We have the Jane Goodall Institute sells little Mr. H's.
Oh, perfect.
They're Mr. H Jr. They're just like him, but smaller. So
okay.
Please support us by buying Mr. H Jr. from us.
Sure, thank you. I have two last things to ask you. First one is just an announcement, Dr. Goodall. You have inspired us so much at Real Leaders that we have decided to launch a new Real Leaders Award, of which you are the first recipient today. We've called it the Real Leaders Lifetime Leadership Award, and we're proud to give it to you today, virtually over Zoom.
Well, thank you.
And with that comes our pledge at Real Leaders to keep highlighting your important work around the preservation of the environment, and just promoting to our global audience the importance of your work and the necessity of people to take the environmental issues seriously if their businesses are to survive. So thank you so much for all the work you do. And I'd like to ask you how the Real Leaders community, the people listening today, can best support your endeavors. Where can we get in touch if we'd like to help or get involved, other than buying Mr. H? And do you have any final call to action that you'd like to share with us?
Well, I think I've called you all to action. You all know what you have to do. You have to do whatever you can to make the world a better place. I don't know you all individually, so I don't know exactly what you can do, but you know what you can do. That's the point. Everybody knows what they can do. And everybody can think, oh gosh, I don't need that. Why should I buy it? Why should I add to this materialistic life that we lead, this destruction of the environment? Was Mahatma Gandhi said, you know, the planet can provide human need, but not human greed. So I know that Sean Sweeney is listening in. He's part of the Jane Goodall Institute, and we can send around the website. It's janegoodall.org, pretty easy. And you could join the Institute. You could support some of our programs. You could get your children involved in Roots and Shoots, and I would urge all of you to do that. And that would be fantastic, because you are all over the world, and we're growing Roots and Shoots all the time. We want to be everywhere. So thank you for asking that.
Sure. Well, Dr. Goodall, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate your time and your deep thoughts.
Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. And
sure.
It would be nice if we were all together, but we're Zooming. So yes. Hello, everybody out there. And I'm sorry I have to rush off. I've got yet another Zoom to do today, and then 2 phone calls about tricky subjects. So I do need to go. But thank you for inviting me, and have a great rest of this session.
Great. Thank you so much.
Bye.